Have you ever noticed how someone who used to text you first, check in, or keep conversations alive, suddenly goes silent? No explanation, no goodbye, just distance. Most people assume the worst. They think they don't care anymore, or they've changed. But what if that's not the truth at all? What if their silence isn't coldness, but something much deeper? The reality is, people don't just wake up one day and decide to disappear. There's usually a quiet story behind a buildup of emotions no one else sees. And often, the ones who go silent are the ones who cared the most, until they couldn't carry it alone anymore. When someone stops reaching out, it's easy to label them as distant or uncaring, but that interpretation often misses the bigger picture. In many cases, their silence isn't about losing interest. It's about something deeper happening beneath the surface. It can be emotional fatigue, unspoken hurt, or the quiet realization that their effort isn't being returned. Instead of seeing withdrawal as rejection, it helps to view it as a psychological response to imbalance, overwhelm, or unmet needs. Sometimes, stepping back isn't about giving up on others. It's about finally listening to yourself. At first, being the one who always reaches out doesn't feel like a problem. You tell yourself it's normal, you care more, you're more thoughtful, you're just that kind of person. So you keep texting first, checking in, making plans, holding the connection together when it starts to fade. But over time, something begins to shift. The effort starts to feel heavier. You notice the replies getting shorter, the energy not being matched, the silence stretching longer each time. What once felt natural slowly turns into something draining. Psychologically, this creates emotional burnout. When someone consistently gives without receiving the same level of care in return, their mind begins to register it as imbalance and, eventually, as a form of emotional risk. Not because they're selfish, but because humans are wired to protect their energy. So one day, without a dramatic decision, they stop reaching out. Not out of indifference, but because continuing to care this way feels like losing a part of themselves. There's a quiet kind of pain that comes from realizing your absence doesn't really change anything. You start pulling back, texting less, showing up, less, and no one seems to notice. No one asks where you've been. No one checks in to see if you're okay. That silence sends a powerful message, even if it's unintentional. It makes you feel invisible, like your presence never truly mattered in the first place. Over time, that feeling begins to sink deeper. You start questioning yourself. Was I ever important to them? Did I care more than they ever did? Psychologically, this kind of experience often leads people to internalize the silence as rejection. Even without clear words, the lack of response speaks loudly. And eventually, the pain of being overlooked becomes heavier than the idea of walking away. So instead of waiting to feel unseen again, they choose to disappear first. There's a subtle but powerful difference between someone being busy and someone truly not showing up for you. Life gets hectic, we all understand that. But when the pattern becomes consistent, when days turn into weeks without effort or acknowledgement, it stops feeling like busyness and starts feeling like indifference. That's where the real pain begins. It's not loud or dramatic, it's quiet, lingering, and deeply personal. You start to feel forgotten, like you've been slowly pushed to the background of someone else's life. And over time, that experience chips away at your sense of self-worth. You begin to wonder if you're asking for too much, or if you were ever valued the way you thought you were. That kind of emotional neglect doesn't just hurt, it reshapes how you see yourself. Not all distance comes from a lack of care sometimes. It comes from feeling overwhelmed. For people who struggle with anxiety, overthinking, or low self-confidence, even simple communication can feel like pressure. A text message isn't just a text, it becomes a moment of self-doubt, a fear of saying the wrong thing, or being misunderstood. For more introverted personalities, social interaction can quietly drain energy instead of restoring it. So instead of reaching out, they begin to pull back. Psychologically, this is a form of avoidance, a coping mechanism, where the mind chooses silence to reduce stress. It's not that they don't want connection, it's that connection starts to feel emotionally risky. From the outside, it may look like they don't care, but internally, they're just trying to protect themselves from a level of pressure they don't know how to handle. Sometimes, the silence isn't about what they feel, it's about not knowing how to put those feelings into words. Not everyone grows up learning how to express emotions clearly or safely. For some, saying "I'm overwhelmed" or "I feel disconnected" feels uncomfortable, even risky. There's a fear of being misunderstood, judged, or saying the wrong thing and making things worse. So instead of opening up, they hold everything in. Psychologically, this reflects a lack of emotional language, the ability to identify and communicate internal experiences. Without that skill, even strong feelings can stay unspoken. And over time, silence becomes the easier option. It's not the healthiest response, but it feels safer than vulnerability. So they don't explain, they don't clarify, they just slowly fade, hoping their absence says what they couldn't. At a certain point, the silence stops feeling temporary and starts becoming the new normal. It doesn't happen all at once. There's no clear decision, no final conversation. It's gradual. The texts become less frequent, the check-ins fade, and the connection slowly loses its rhythm. What used to feel alive turns quiet, almost unnoticed. Psychologically, this is how many relationships drift apart, not through conflict, but through absence. The distance grows in small, almost invisible steps until it feels too late to reverse. And eventually, both sides adapt to the silence. What remains isn't a clean ending, but a relationship that quietly fades away, without ever being fully acknowledged. At some point, something shifts internally. It's not loud or dramatic, it's quiet, but deeply decisive. After trying, waiting, and giving more than they received, they begin to see things more clearly. They start to recognize their own value, not based on how much they can give, but on what they deserve in return. And with that awareness comes a difficult truth. They don't want to keep showing up for something that isn't meeting them halfway. The effort that once felt like love now feels like self-neglect. So they begin to let go, not out of anger, but out of clarity. Psychologically, this is a turning point where self-worth becomes stronger than attachment. And for the first time, walking away feels more honest than staying. Eventually, it stops being about the other person and starts becoming about self-respect. They no longer feel the urge to chase, to double text, or to prove their worth through constant effort. The need for attention fades, not because they don't care, but because they've learned that real connection doesn't require begging to be seen. This is where boundaries begin to form, often quietly and without announcement. They choose not to overextend themselves, not to give where there is no reciprocity, and not to ignore their own needs just to keep someone else comfortable. Psychologically, this reflects growth. It's the shift from external validation to internal stability. Walking away, in this case, isn't an act of pride, it's an act of self-respect. They're not closing themselves off from connection. They're simply choosing not to settle for less than they deserve. If you've ever been the one who slowly stopped reaching out, understand this: you're not cold, and you're not wrong. You didn't give up easily. You simply reached a point where continuing felt more painful than stepping back. Choosing silence doesn't mean you don't care, it often means you care deeply, for a long time, without being met halfway. And there's nothing wrong with finally choosing yourself. Real connections don't require you to lose your sense of worth to keep them alive. So, if this resonates with you, take a moment to reflect on what you truly deserve. And if you want more insights like this, real, honest, and grounded in human psychology, make sure to follow and stay connected.